Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Tung-Hui Hu in support of his recently published book, Digital Lethargy, comes out today, and in conversation this evening with Franny Choi. Just a quick webinar overview for our attendees this evening. The chat is closed, but you can keep the chat window open. I'll be sharing links to purchase Digital Lethargy and pre-order The World Keeps Ending and the World Goes On from Literati Bookstore throughout the event. You can interact with us at any time, however, using the Q&A feature of the webinar. Please feel free to submit your questions whenever they come to you. I will read a selection of those questions at the conclusion of the conversation this evening. And live transcription is also available to you using the CC icon on your toolbar as well. And if you're watching us later on YouTube, there are always links to purchase books in the description directly below me. You can also click on the little typewriter icon in the corner of your screen to subscribe to our channel and to be kept up to date with all of our at home with Literati events once they become available there. And as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan or the Ann Arbor area, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping. But most of all, we would just like to thank you for your attendance this evening, or much later this evening, or early this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us. But without further ado, I'll introduce tonight's author and our interlocutor. Tung-Hui Hu is Associate Professor of English at the University of Michigan, a former network engineer and a published poet. He is the author of A Prehistory of the Cloud. He was awarded the Rome Prize in Literature in 2022. Speaking with him this evening, Franny Choi is the author of several books, including The World Keeps Ending and the World Goes On, out from Echo Books in November, Soft Science, Floating Brilliant Gone, and a chapbook, Death by Sex Machine. She was a 2019 Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fellow and has received awards from the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts and Princeton University's Lewis Center. Her poems have appeared in the New York Times, The Nation, The Atlantic, Paris Review, and elsewhere. She's currently an Arthur Levitt Jr. Artist in Residence at Williams College. Please join me in welcoming Tung-Hui Hu and Franny Choi into your living rooms.
Hi, Wei Wei.
Hey, Franny, how are you?
Good. I have to, and welcome everybody who is here joining us from wherever you're joining us. I'm so excited to talk to you, Wei Wei. Wei Wei was one of my teachers when I was at Michigan, and there are so many like lessons and conversations and concepts and things that I just like hold on to, especially now as I'm teaching creative writing. So I just want to say, like, first of all, thank you, and also just huge congrats again on your book.
Thanks. And you know, a lot of the poems that I was reading that became part of Soft Science were, of course, floating around my head as I was writing it. So when I was thinking, who do I want to talk to? I mean, in some ways, I was already talking or having a conversation with those poems. So thanks for making the time to do this. And hey, participants, nice to see you too.
Yeah, hey y'all. Okay, well, I think that we sort of have to start in the obvious place that you have started a million times before at events such as this, which is kind of just like to lay the groundwork for the rest of this conversation, a definition of digital lethargy, and maybe sort of like as related to, but also distinct from other forms like that you mentioned in the book, like sloth and fatigue and burnout. And maybe these days we're also all talking about like Zoom fatigue. So yeah, maybe can we just start with like the Cliff Notes version of what digital lethargy means?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I really want to hire someone to write the Cliff Notes version of this book. I think the closest I got was the index, right? Because the indexer is just trying to figure out what is going on here. But I think that lethargy is my attempt to update all these definitions, right? So burnout is a thing that the World Health Organization diagnoses as related as a problem of work. It's a problem that specifically comes out of the free clinics in San Francisco, where the workers that were providing free care were talking about how they were burned out and they couldn't do it after a few months. But it really, so it's kind of a medical affliction. It affects medical doctors, and it's also something that gets pathologized in some ways. Lethargy, I feel like, I mean, the work of being oneself is really the work today. It's not just about logging in and clocking in your hours for your job. I mean, one is lethargic because everything that we do is, in some sense, towards the work of being ourselves online. The work, I mean, there's no online anymore, right? Like we are just figures, and I think that. I wanted to invoke all these previous ideas of acedia, of sloth, of busy idleness, to try to understand what all these other sort of problems of selfhood were at one point in time. And because I think a lot of that has come back, right? This idea that we doom scroll all the time on our phones when we're not really sure what to do is also lethargic, because it is very similar to the kind of acedia that the early Christian monks would have. It's, lethargic, lethargy for me isn't just about being slow or being tired. It's also about being hyperactive and being too much, but just not having any point to it. So I wanted to give a name to this feeling that I think is in a lot of places we can't quite name why we are, why we're. I mean, in my case, good things happen to me, and I, have this self-sabotaging side of myself that doesn't want that, and like why is it that lethargy seems to be everywhere in certainly in places like Zoom fatigue. But for me, Zoom fatigue is also that really affects white collar workers, right? Like it's almost a status symbol. It's like, oh God, I was on 9 hours of meetings today on Zoom fatigue. And what I really wanted to get at was, a kind of feeling that describes also what, the people who make the internet work, the people who are making the service industry work, the people who provide service with a smile on the internet, the warehouse workers, the people who train AIs. I wanted to talk about them and get, their sense of depersonalization into the picture as well. So I'm hoping that lethargy is something that's a little bit more capacious and honestly more political than something like Zoom burnout, which doesn't feel like it quite does it for me.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, I really appreciate that that sort of naming of Zoom fatigue as like a white collar sort of, I mean, like sort of mythologized in kind of a similar way to that earlier burnout, but in tied to class in this way. Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about that relationship between users and servers? I'll just read one sentence that I pulled out. The lethargy that these workers share across the globe, laboring together at the edge of the human, suggests there's more in common between users and servers than we would normally recognize. I mean, I think that this is one of the kind of major consideration of this book that I found so revealing, and that I appreciated so much, that it was not simply about the affect of the user end, but the connection between the people whose labor makes the internet go, as you say. So can you talk about kind of that relationship a little more? Like, how is it manufactured, the way it's put to use?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're in this moment where humanness, we're being live, we're being engaged, we're being interactive is the highest value possible, right? And everything has to be more lively. And of course, this is something that has to be manufactured by people. I mean, I think about Sarah Sharma's work in her book, In the Meantime. She talks about, all these executives who want to slow down and take their time. But of course, at the edge of that, there are all these cab drivers who are rushing them to their meetings so that they can have the time to, be, considerate and think about all these things. So, I mean, for me, being engaged and being human and being interactive, all these things being live essentially is something that's made possible by people who either sweep away all the detritus of the internet, by people who are, I mean, one example was that they're workers who essentially work as computer code, right? They can be called by a program. So in your program, you summon them by running a function, just like you'd run any other function in computer code. You might not even realize that there are people that are behind the API. And this is sort of what's sold as allowing those programmers to be creative, to do meaningful work, that they're makers, right? And of course, it's really happening is that you're just outsourcing all the drudge work to someone else in the global south, right? To a place in Bangladesh, to a place in the Philippines, where you're being paid, kind of terrible wages. And of course, you're being outsourced to these places that already have a long history of outsourcing, right? So these are places which became known as really good at call center work. Because of colonial ties, they spoke English, right? The Philippines, of course, being the former American colony. And so this is just kind of the newest iteration of that, where you kind of take all the annoying parts, the sort of parts that cause friction on the internet, and send it to someone else. But that's true also for warehouse workers that bring you that convenience, so that you can like magically open a box of, with a little smile on the side of it and say, oh, look, here's my packages. Someone is there rushing around and skipping bathroom breaks, so that you can feel like it's magic. You just press the button and then a package arrives a few hours later or a day later. So those are the people that really wanted to form the concept of lethargy around. But of course, these people who I'm describing as servers, because they occupy service positions, because they seem like computer servers and are computer servers in some ways, are also users too, right? And we, people are trying to extract money from data from them as well. They use the internet just like we do. One example I have is the person who works at the Amazon warehouse, goes home and shops on Amazon afterwards, right? And in a similar way, we as users, to use that very fraught word, we are very much in the process of being turned into services that we just like to think of ourselves as being very individual and very unique and so on. So I wanted to use lethargy to try to talk about the connection between those two, between maybe someone who thinks of themselves as the ultimate maker user, maybe in the US, and someone who's on the other side of the globe, providing the backend support for that operation.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes me think of it makes me think of many things, but one of them being like the kind of CAPTCHA things that we use, which is, I mean, I think it stands for, what does it stand for? Like completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart. I think that's what.
Yeah, you got thinking like it's faster than I could do it. I was trying to work through that one too.
But it's doing that, but also it's like doing like image recognition labor for the AI at the same time. But I mean, and it makes me also think of you mentioned the Mechanical Turk in this book, and I don't know, I keep getting like caught up on so the mechanical Turk being like a service. Maybe you can explain it better than I can, but like through Amazon to connect people who want to earn a few pennies for to help like with train AI. Yeah, right. That's basically.
Yeah. I mean, we can do a lot of things on Mechanical Turk, but it's this whole idea of exactly turning people into services, right? So that you're no longer someone who's hired to do a job. You're hired to do like a micro contract, right? Which is fill out this form, or recognize a word, or transcribe something, something really simple and basic. And yes, that. But sorry, you were asking about AMT.
Yeah. Well, but I think that I keep also like getting caught on the origin of like the original Mechanical Turk, which was like this sort of automaton, or supposed to be an automaton, but it was actually like a guy inside with like a candle moving the thing. But also like it was specifically, presumably, like a European guy hiding inside of like a Turkish person, a statue of an automaton of a Turkish person. And so like, I don't know, it makes me think about the ways that certain people have been racialized to always be, have always been racialized to be considered like appropriate for the drudgery of like the labor of the automaton.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. And I've been asked, trying to figure out from my colleagues, the exact way, like the reason why it was a Turk. I think Bernie Geoghegan has a new article about that. But there is this strange way in which race becomes there right at the very beginning of how we understand machines and objects to work. One of my colleagues here is looking at Islamic texts in which the other person sort of gets put in the role of the automaton, and it happens like everywhere. I mean, one of the books that I was reading by Curtis Mares about farm workers, it's this idea that even though farm workers from Mexico were operating these really skilled machines, this is in the 40s or so, people wanted to describe them as unskilled workers that were just doing repetitive robotic work because they wanted to pay them less, right? That's like people are racialized in order to, capture their labor for capital. I mean, it's a sort of very, unfortunately, very, very old story. But I think that one of the things, and I'm thinking about your line from Soft Science in that the speakers turned into a technology for desire, right? Unwillingly. I mean, people are turned into technologies, and that is sort of how that is one of the ways that race works. Is turning someone into a robot, turning someone into a bracero, or someone into a coolie. Christian Goring-Doty was mentioning that the way that the transatlantic slave trade worked was that there are different parts of the supply chain there, and you had different climates, and so the enslaved person in the American South was its own form of technology, just as technologies such as the tools that the overseer would use were also. It's really unsettling, and I am still wincing at even saying it, that the way in which bodies are turned into technologies is one of the big stories of racial capitalism. And if we start to understand technology as more than just like this piece of computer code, I also think that technologies can be kind of redemptive too. I mean, I'm not saying that technology is itself bad, but I was thinking about this piece, Secret Garden, by Stephanie Dinkins, and in one of it's a piece about maybe six Black women standing, and the voice in the background says, AI is your progeny and also your remembering. So there's this idea that AI is something that is not just a contemporary day thing, but has existed since cultivation, since planting. And so I think that's one of the, I sort of meandered a little bit, but I think that's one of the goals that this book was trying to do, is try to think about technology very expansively.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think that part of that expansiveness also, it seems to be like a kind of refusal to say, or to kind of accept that, agency, expression, selfhood, not being a machine, good, like acting like a machine, complying, abiding, bad. But you also kind of, I feel, I just felt very impressed reading this book by how you were able to both kind of push against that formulation while also acknowledging the very real kind of material differences and impacts of that formulation, particularly on people of color and workers from the global South. And I wondered if you could talk about like how you did that, like how you managed to hold sort of both, like what helped you navigate that. I mean, it's a really sticky space.
Yeah, it's so sticky and it's so hard. I mean, I still have so much ambivalence about it. I mean, I think that what I was trying to argue in the book is that to be acted upon, right, to endear something, to abide something, is its own form of I don't even know what I keep using the word capacity in the book because to me agency feels so charged. I mean, I was talking to someone here and they're like, agency is such like an American idea, you know, like everybody has to have agency all the time. But I do, you know, and I think that there are historical reasons in which this model of like individualism and agency got embedded into the internet, right? So it is like larger than an American story now. But I do think that the capacity to endure something is also the capacity to like set aside this model of you know, individual action, you know, good, you know, speaking up good, because of course for people of color, you know, this whole idea of speech has always been so fraught on, you know, whether we're civil or whether we're able to speak, what we are able to say at any moment. And I feel like, I mean, this is a really hard thing to say, but you know, I'm thinking even about you know, what stories. I guess, for lack of a better, when I teach, right, I sometimes see students of color, and I mean, this happened to certainly happened to me when I was in class, and you know, there's a moment where like you could tell that the teacher would be really happy when I was like talking about my Asianness in a certain way, and they'd be like, "Oh yes, like you're being like properly ethnic right now." You know, you're sort of representing yourself, and there are times where I'm like, I don't want to be, you know, always talking about, you know, myself as a Chinese American body, you know, like there are times where I don't want that to be like the only thing that I can do, and there are times where I want to be silent, where there are times where I want to be, where I want to do, you know, my, you know, Kevin Quashie has this brilliant book where he talks about the capacity of silence within, you know, all these famous pictures like the Greensboro sit-ins, where we're like, we want resistance, we want action, we want something heroic, we want like confrontation, we want, you know, we want to see the violence, which is its own like kind of like awful, you know, sense that every time we see a Black body, we want a certain kind of violence to descend upon it. So he's pointing us to the quiet that these boys in the photograph are doing. These 18-year-olds, they're reading books, they're thinking. There's something inside that can't be captured by but by what we normally assign to be political or agentive. At the same, so that's why I wanted to negotiate that and try to lay out at least a, you know, a space for being acted upon as a space for queer agency, for queer capacity, for, you know, for something. With all that said, right, like the world is gone, it has been and is especially, you know, in a state of total shit right now, and so it seems very hard, especially hard to make that statement now. And there's certainly moments where like all I want to do is like, you know, go to the streets and burn something down, or, you know, like I mean, so I think the hardest part for me is just trying to understand the relationship between lethargy and maybe more conventional forms of action or politics. And I'm still not sure I don't have like a, you know, one sentence answer for that. Like, I think that, you know, lethargy, which is an affect, which means that it is a feeling that you share with other people, is so important and necessary. And I also think that it's so important and necessary before we can even talk about politics. And I guess I would also say that, you know, everybody has always said to me, like, you know, like, what should we do? Like, you know, we all know that the digital stuff is bad. What should we do? But I really wanted to say, like, what is the problem with the word do? Or like, what do we mean by doing before we get into, you know, what we do? So that's not totally a good answer to your question, but it's so hard to answer because it's like it pierces me. Like it's so hard to yeah.
I think that's a great answer. I think it's a great answer. No, I mean, I think that like you know, like you mentioned, there is wisdom in, you know, queer theories of receiving and sort of like, I don't know, I mean, I just kept thinking about like this is a sort of theory of like bottoming in some ways, yeah, and like the finding, like much has been said about the power of the bottom. And yeah, I mean, and I think that like there's I found it I found it really really moving to go from to also like include within the scope of like sort of like good ways or like valuable, honorable or something, like ways to be in a system where there are almost no good choices, to have that also include enduring and surviving and waiting out and kind of like wallowing or sitting in the muck of it, and like that is like I don't know, you talk about there's a question, you say, what is it like to live inside dead time? And I just like it feels very it feels like it feels like it's doing right by the people who kind of, as you say, like don't have good choices to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the real question about time here is, how do we do a theory of the digital that is, I mean, I really do feel like, all these things that people are complaining about in the media about the digital, I mean, someone did a poll, and I mean, if there's one thing that Republicans and Democrats can agree on in the US, it's that tech companies suck, right? So like, this is not a book that says like tech companies suck. Like, we all know this. What I'm trying to get at is that all these like sudden concerns about privacy, all these sudden concerns about, having your body, having things extracted from your body. I mean, these have already happened for people of color, right? And these forms of surveillance are not new forms of, I mean, certainly they're intensified and they're certainly far worse. But this is the kind of temporality of lethargy, right? Is that, when the apocalypse has happened, when the world has ended, and then you're still there, you're still enduring. How do you talk about that weirdness? How do you talk about, that sort of strange temporal model? So this is why I was thinking about, some of your poetry in your upcoming book, because in it you have this beautiful poem about grief and the sort of attempt to capture the tense of it, right? And how difficult it is to put down to even like form a sentence with grief, because you're not quite sure, what form of present or what form of pastness that is not yet past exists in the present. So I mean, I think that was by dead time. I think the second thing I should say is that dead time is not, it's not empty, right? It's not, it can be full of joy. It can be full of music and dance, and as it is for so many of the people that I write about, who are often artists and are often making things like dance happen within the situation, within the sort of endless present of colonialism. For example, in the case of Puerto Rico, right, where we have yet another hurricane, and now the power grid is owned by a private company. I mean, this is like Maria repeated again, right? But it is certainly possible to have joy and life and all these things within dead time. So there's nothing about, I mean, as I'm sort of quoting or misquoting Sandra Ruiz here, but one of the things that she writes about Ricanness is that it's about, what is it like to hold that death to you and to kind of keep on going. If I'm sort of paraphrasing badly, but so lethargy is kind of an attempt to work that out, I guess. But I'll stop myself there.
I mean, you can keep going, but I also respect your decision to stop there. Okay.
The
well,
problem is, I think I know all the participants pretty much, so like they know that I just ramble. That's my real personality. So.
Well, I have other like more within the text questions, but I also now want to ask you about what your favorite doing nothing activity is.
This is probably not the right answer, but in the earlier in the pandemic, there's a tax sale, like basically foreclosure auction in Michigan. And what so of course the fantasy of like, scrap everything and move to some small cabin. But what was really fascinating were just the strange properties that were listed on the website. Like there was a guy that used to have exotic animals because it was like a wild elephant ranch or something. They were just like, you kind of saw these photographs where the Detroit, these things had been abandoned for 20 or 30 years. So, the signs are rusted and you had like very strange, like, what could that be used for? That barn is not the size of a normal horse barn, And then of course you had strange compounds by survivalists. You had, ranches, punching lodges in the middle of nowhere where you could only get to by helicopter. There's something about the schools that were abandoned because the town had shrunk. There's something like really intense about seeing all these traces of people's former lives. And, I mean, of course, I didn't ever buy anything, but there was something really fun about that. So, yeah.
This was like an estate sale, or what was this?
So the state seizes properties if they don't pay their taxes, and after like a really long process. And by the way, the people often still live inside these properties. Some of them are totally abandoned and have been, but some of them are still in the property, and the guy can't take pictures of them because the guy has a gun, and so that they'll have some very like anodyne thing like, watch out for the very aggressive occupant, stay your distance if you want to check out the property. So but because everything is like $100 or something, one has the fantasy of buying some strange timber town in the middle of nowhere from the yeah, I don't know if that's I feel like I should say something more academically respectable. I'm sorry, Franny. What do you do for doing nothing? What's your answer to that question?
I was gonna say, wow, that was not at all what I expected you to say. I thought you were gonna be like Candy Crush or something.
Yeah. I mean,
that's amazing.
I have a toddler, right? I mean, that's the and we do a lot of killing time. Like there's just a lot of yeah. So the real answer like these days is probably that I make truck noises and act like he's very into mechanical objects. So I'm a forklift. So yeah, that's the I should say I'm watching like junk TV that's actually like brilliant, something trashy that actually is great. But I don't even think, because my partner is very into time travel and television, like I can't even say anything with a straight face. So yeah.
I mean, truck noises that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I mean, because I think like it's like, for me it's like Pinterest a wedding, or a wedding next summer, or like petting my cat. But also for me it's also like going really okay, I don't think that my partner is on this call, so he won't know that I'm putting our lives on blast here. But I've been sort of putting, he complained that he didn't understand my vision for the wedding. So I was like, what if I made a PowerPoint? Would that help? And he said he made the mistake of saying yes. And so now like making a PowerPoint slide of slides for my vision for the wedding is like the thing that I do.
That's amazing.
But it's like, it feels like productive, but it's like obviously not, but like that. Yeah. So it kind of gets, it's just like junk food but it's,
yeah. It's so fascinating because like, I feel like we're supposed to feel productive, I mean, this, like all these apps are trying to make us productive out of doing nothing. And I mean, I was reading this book by an anthropologist, Craig, I can't his last name, but he's writing about time passed in India. And the idea is that people take degrees in school as a form of time pass. They know it's a completely worthless degree because the school is unaccredited and like nobody cares about the actual degree, but they're doing it because and it's kind of like an interesting flip where from the outside, we'd be like, oh, that's great. You're a student, like you're like gamefully, doing something useful. But they're like, we will never get a job. There's no hope because we're not politically connected. We can't bribe anybody to do it. So how do we sort of like take the, I mean, this is really the situation I'm interested in, is like the endless time that people are weighted down for, right? But Nefertiti Tadier talks about, Filipino domestic workers as being someone who's like, you just have time on your hands. Like, how do you do? But I think there is actually a connection between, killing time on Pinterest, or I think making PowerPoints is just amazing. I discovered my partner didn't know how to use image editing software, and she had to make things like a mug or something. And so all she did it all in PowerPoint. She did this like elaborate thing, all by, yeah. So I have so much respect for you doing that. But I think there is a connection between, how do we deal with the constraints that we have, and how do we look like how do we even tell ourselves, because we are so wired to like want to feel like we're doing something. And what happens if we just like call it what it is, right? Which is like we're doing nothing, and that's okay, right? And how do we do nothing collectively, right? Instead of by ourselves, and what could that lead to? So.
I love doing nothing collectively. I think that sounds really, that's really good. I mean, because that sort of seems like the key, like a key that you land on in this project, that like it's that connection to others that are working at the edge of the human, or living at the edge of the human, that is kind of like, yeah, I don't think that your book exactly like proposes any clear-cut solutions, but if there's any sort of door or window that you find, that seems to be one of them.
Yeah, I mean, how do we have solidarity with other people who, by design are isolated from us, right? Lily Arani has a plugin for Amazon Mechanical Turk, which still allows you to log onto a board and get a sense of what other workers might be on the same task as you, because otherwise, like, the whole goal of digital capitalism is to isolate you. This is like part of the reason why feeling like you're an individual, feeling like you're an authentic person, feeling like you're human, that you're somebody and not someone else, works, right? Is that it's also an attempt to isolate you, so that you can't have any sort of, so that you feel like you are the person in charge of things, rather than the sense that you are working next to 1,000 other people, providing data, making this whole system work.
I do want to leave time for you to read a little bit of that postscript, which is so beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for. Yeah, I'm happy to. So, word to the wise to the audience, this is an academic book and it should never be read out loud. But I was inspired, I think, in part by Jackie Wang's Carceral Capitalism, right, which ends with a poem, and there are a few other books that kind of switch the genre really at the very end of the book. And so, I think statistically, no one actually makes it through more than 1 or 2 chapters of any given book. So no one ever gets to the postscript, which is why I felt like I had the freedom to write whatever I wanted. So postscript, look alive. You're here, you're at the end, but lethargy isn't something that really ends. And so at the risk of trying your patience, I ask you to please wait a few more moments, because isn't that what you do? That's the awful equation that everyone seems to accept. The human chooses while the server waits. You're waiting for life to resume, which is to say, maybe you're waiting for the next job, or maybe the next job is simply the job of waiting for someone else, or being a buffer for someone else who can't afford to wait. You don't have time that is separate from your being, as Nefertiti Tadier writes about domestic workers. It's all undifferentiated, measureless time. But you do know how to find little pockets within that wait to pass time, or to kill time, to see past time's deadness. This is your special capacity. This is how you get through the day, how you can endure a world that will not have you, but to which you cleave nonetheless. But waiting and staying in always telescopes outwards. There's what you might say if it wasn't too overwhelming to speak. There's not just that restless feeling, but also the restlessness of feeling that connects you to others, the way insomnia can sometimes be a consolation. In the middle of the night, every insomniac is in it somehow, in an electric green wash of screens and pings and swipes. This is your way of being with others, not through understanding them better, but simply because you're next to them on the network, because there's an intimacy between all the hands that have touched the cardboard box as it winds its way to its eventual owner. objects sharing intimacy too, a nod that one gives when passing each other in the street or queuing next to each other for a job. And I guess I will maybe just read the very last bit of it. It's summer where I am, which is actually true. I'm in Rome, so it is summer still. The heavy rains that flooded the interstate highway earlier have made the wood floors buckle and slump. The air is still with moisture. There's probably a metaphor here somewhere. The book we've been writing for 6 years is nearly over, and yet I'm still stuck with it, trying to make sense of what it has been to keep company with lethargy. If there have been a few silences along the way, it's because the book feels inadequate to the story. So the rest, promise, we'll tell each other the rest another time.
I love that this, well, I love so many things about this postscript. The kind of direct address to the others who are next to this speaker on the network, the way that you shift to a more lyrical mode. Yeah, I mean, I have so many. I think that I would love to ask you a lot of questions specifically about the second person, but in lieu of that, I think that maybe yeah, oh, and yeah, the way that it reaches out. I don't know, was there something that opened up actually in the kind of like more lyric way of writing than that hadn't exactly been there in the rest? Or
I wanted to call into the space, the servers, right, who I've been talking to in some sense, and who, I mean, when you write an academic book, you always are like a little bit vague about like, we believe this to be true, we have found, through our observations, and one assumes that the you is the reader. The truth is, and I'll be really blunt about it here because I think I can, I think a lot of people are going to read this book and think that this book is about them. It's not, right? It's not about, someone with Zoom fatigue. It's not about someone, I mean, it is, right? But it's like not, it's really, meant for the people that I met along the way and so I think that I could sort of pull a little bit of a bait and switch and give that feeling, of saying like that is the we that I cared about. And, you who thought you were the reader of this book can try to be part of that or not, right? I mean, Citizen does such a great job of switching between the I and the you, or using the you as a kind of like, which audience are you really writing to? And so I'm not trying to exclude anybody from the book, of course, but I wanted to point out that, I mean, I was thinking, there's that person that, and of course, 70% of the people who work at Amazon on the front lines are persons of color, right? So like, who's the person who's like putting this book in the box and getting it from one point to another? So yeah, I don't know how to, it makes me realize like also how privileged I am, right, to be an academic, to like have the luxury of having, to just kind of like theorize when this is, a very live thing right now, right? So, I mean, we've all been watching the unionization drives with Amazon. And so these aren't abstract questions, right? And so I think that what really ended up happening, right, like my current, as they say, my current project, because you always have to have a current project, is that I'm trying to learn ethnography. I'm just trying to learn how to talk to people. This is like the awkwardness of me, right? Like I don't know how to talk to anybody, so I have to like actually study how to talk to people so I can talk to people. But anyway, that's my hope. I think my next book is really, going to be a lot less theory with a capital T, and yeah, just trying to learn from the people I want to talk to. So I don't know. The other thing is that I'm supposedly writing poems this year, so I don't know if this book has opened up anything, but I use the word object in my book. Objects have a life of their own, right? Because of course I'm writing about people who are objectified, and I've been writing a poem about the punishment of objects as a kind of a very indirect way of getting at how to talk about people who or things that haven't had a voice. I just learned an hour ago that the Romans used to think about the enslaved persons in their household as speaking tools. They had to just differentiate between speaking tools and non-speaking tools. And so, yeah, so I think it will land somewhere in the poems, but I'm not totally sure yet. So thanks for asking.
Yeah. Oh, I want to, well, before I say this, I'll say, if you haven't seen John's message in the chat, I will add, don't forget to submit any questions that you have using the Q&A function. But, well, actually, I guess maybe we should check in with John and see if anyone has questions or if not.
We do have a question. And then if viewers out there have additional questions, please feel free to submit your question and I'll read it. But Martha writes, I'm thinking about this goes back to your discussion about user servers, perhaps a bit. I'm thinking about the DALL-E tool and their description of the beta phase as an, quote, iterative rollout, using these beta testers to teach the AI and making the labor of that AI testing invisible to these users. So I'm curious about this idea that the labor is being rebranded as an iterative process here.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that this is where users are actually services, right? We're really services for the purpose of collecting data, teaching AIs. Every time, and I'm really bad at passing those capture tests, right? So like every time, like, oh God, I'm not a human. I have to like click some more zebras or whatever traffic lights or something in this image. Of course, like we are very explicitly training AIs. Like this is not something that's just about like outsourced and insourced, right? We're doing it all the time, and we're doing it when we mark our emails like as spam or as something that we don't like. Every time we express our preferences. So yeah, Martha. I think that iterative. There's something cool about beta testing and iteration, and this is the same kind of old gimmick that's been used to make labor free labor, right? Like why are graduate students teaching? Because they love the job, not because they're teachers and workers, right? So this is a classic way of obfuscating the actual labor within it. So. And hi, Martha. Good to see you.
Thank you. Franny, if you had additional questions, I have no more questions currently in the Q&A, but if folks, we still have a few more minutes left. So if you have a question that comes to your mind, please feel free to submit it. But unless I get another question.
Am I allowed to ask Franny questions?
Yes. I was about to say, I know you might have had questions for Franny, so please feel free.
Franny, you said that you're writing a little bit about AI and robots, and I'm just kind of curious to hear more about that. You were saying you're doing an essay, and I know that it sort of floats in your poetry as well. But yeah, what does that look like for you?
Oh yeah, I am working on a book about. I'm contractually obligated to be working on a book about essays, a book of essays about robots. So I am working on it. Yeah, it's because I've been kind of knee deep in this project of, it's like personal essays, or sort of writing a line between personal essay and cultural criticism, I suppose. But for that reason, I think I've been it's about sort of like race and gender and media representations of robots, and sort of specifically about like the trope of the Asian robot lady, which if you know soft science, that'll sound very familiar, but then it's because I wasn't done with the topic yet, and I wanted to give myself a sort of impossible task of learning a whole other genre to write in. But for that reason, I found a lot of like kinship with, and like I don't want to say well, I found this book to be like really really I don't know, educating or something. I like loved hanging out in these ideas, especially about sort of like the kind of affect of the object and what we learn from robotic affect, what we learn from the sort of ability, capacity to endure, and to like the power, what might be there in inertness that we don't think of as being there in inertness. And
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm constantly sort of, I even remember I mean, one's affect is so racialized, right? Like, and you know, I'm sure both of us have gone through this over and over, where we're sort of constantly being read to see whether or not, I mean, you know, I feel like I've gone through a lot of experiences where people are trying to read whether or not I'm lively. I mean, this is like the inscrutable Asian thing, right?
yeah.
But also, you know, like, where's my person? So, I mean, I learned to stick a lot of exclamation marks in my emails to seem like I had like a lot more, you know, personality, because I was so worried about it that, so to that form of overcompensation just feels like another element of you know, and this is, I mean, I don't, this is certainly like an axis, right? Like when Sian Nai talks about animatedness, right? You know, that Black bodies are always seen as like overactive and always like amped up to 10, and so, but that's like another way of racializing someone, right? Is to sort of underscore that they're outside of the norm. In any case, I wanted to try to see what would happen if we, you know, embraced the roboticness, right? To sort of understand how that is its own, yeah, there's something interesting about that affect, right? It's not just a defect. It's not just like there's an absence there that we need to fill somehow. But yeah, so I don't think I ever, you know, like there's like the idea of sino-futurism. There's like all these interesting ideas. You know, I have a student at UCLA who's writing about the swarm in K-pop, is, you know, which is, the swarm is another kind of like non-human seeming, and of course they're like explicitly being compared, you know, to bots, right? Like every time people are like feel threatened by having too many, you know, actual people online, they're like, okay, well, this is probably like a bot army, right? So there's something interesting, you know, about bot tactics, about adopting these forms of non-humanness. And I'm not smart enough to go there, but I know so many cool people who are doing that work. And yeah, that's why I was excited to hear about your essays, because it feels like it gets at something that it's both like so problematic, right? Like so problematic that, like, I remember, was it like AI, the movie with Alicia Vikander, right? That you had mentioned at one point for soft science. It's so fucked up that I also want to like find something there, right? That the answer is not to turn us all into sort of slightly degraded versions of whiteness, right? That like action and speaking up and all this like expressivity shouldn't be allied to whiteness. So yeah. Whew.
Yeah, I mean, at some point in the process of being obsessed with that movie, with Ex Machina, I like BitTorrented the film and then cut it up so that it was only the only takes where the character Kyoko was in the frame, and like made like a sort of supercut situation of it. And then it told this different story of this like
Amazing
woman who was just like waiting, watching, and then like stabbed a man, you know? So yeah. I also, I mean, I would love to talk to you about well, there's an essay that I'm trying to map out right now for the book that's about kind of robot, sort of like unfeeling and inscrutability. But I'm thinking about Data in Star Trek: The Next Generation. I don't know if you have any familiarity with Star Trek, but
I always found Data to be like so strange on The Next Generation. I wasn't like a
yeah.
huge fan, but like there's something like unsettling about it. I don't know.
Oh, there's something deep. It's like his skin. It's the something
Yeah,
that's
his
deeply
skin is,
unsettling. Yeah. But I think there's this episode where there's like a little, like a child who like is like a refugee and has like experienced this very traumatic event, and he meets Data and then starts to kind of like sort of ape him in his like affectlessness and says like, I do not understand, and it's like this way of trying to like, dissociate and not feel the things that he's experienced. And then there's also like another episode where he like creates a daughter who's like him, except that she can feel, and she ends up like perishing because she's like, it's too much, I hate this is like, it's not worth it. And so I think she just says like, basically she makes him kill her. And so yeah, I don't know, I think it would be great to just talk to you more about Data.
I mean, I do feel like there's like dissociation is a valid response to, and if in some ways like kind of a logical response to like how the world is around us. And the film that I talk about, Sleeping Beauty, in the book, Alex, I think you're on the participant list. But this idea that that what she has to defend herself is protocol, right? Her like literally etiquette, right? Like she can say, thank you very much, and it's her way of deflecting and disassociating from the world, which is just horrible to her. Like it's a totally misogynist world that is trying to like literally trip her and break her. So I mean, there's something like moving to me, like ironically, I guess, about these moments of affectlessness. And I mean, I still go back to Lauren Berlant's article, Structures of Unfeeling, and this idea that being affectlessness, being underperforming or not having affect is also it's a hesitation, right? According to them, it's a moment of not knowing how to respond and not having to collect oneself emotionally before engaging. And so they have all these films like Greg Araki's Mysterious Skin, where the non-response or the beta-like response is like this kind of way of I'm doing a very bad job of describing this, but it's a kind of constellation of feeling that shows up as unfeeling. But it is itself like its own thing. And they have names, right? That they've given. Dead voice, I think, was one of the words that I learned from that article. So, unfeeling is like a whole terrain that I feel like is just normally seen as the negation of feeling, right? But it's not, right? That they're not opposites, actually.
Right. It's like a retreat. I don't know. I feel like I'm hearing you kind of describe like a retreat from the burden of expressive
feeling.
humanness. Yeah. A feeling. So like a very like a protective sort of shell. I mean, I guess that's we understand it to be like a shell, but like a shell that's protective from something.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that it's 7:01, and so I think that perhaps we've overstayed our welcome.
John's gonna give us the
but wait, I just wanted to say thank you so much for I don't know, for writing this book and for asking me to be in conversation with you. It's like, again, it's just really moving to me that you would think of me for be the one to kind of incoherently babble with you, or incoherently babble while you say really smart things. So I just really appreciate it.
It's 1 a.m. in my time, so yeah.
Oh my god, that's so terrible. Wow,
No,
I'm so impressed.
I think that's the nice thing about lethargy, right? Is that we are why should brilliance be our the thing that we want the most, right? So thank you, Franny, for doing this. I'm so grateful to see you again, and to look forward to your poems that are coming out really, really soon. They're so amazing poems. So thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both. It's not possible to overstay your welcome. I would listen to many more hours of you two in conversation. But I do want to let our viewers go. But thank you both for joining us. You can purchase Digital Lethargy. There's links in the chat. There's links below. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can also pre-order Franny Choi's The World Keeps Ending and the World Goes On, which will be released by Echo later this fall. Thank you both again for joining us. Hope to have you in the store in the not too distant future, but until then, be well. And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us on At Home with Literati. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Have a great evening, everybody. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.